She said it quietly. That was the part I keep coming back to. Not as a joke, not with a smirk, not with any of the armor she usually wore to the office like a second skin. She said it the way people say things they have been carrying for a long time, carefully, like she was still deciding whether to let it go. I've been waiting to be alone with you. I expected her to take it back. That was the reasonable thing. She was Nadia Reyes, and Nadia Reyes did not say things like that. She sent emails with bullet points. She used words like bandwidth and deliverable without any trace of irony. She had once CC'd our entire department into a reply intended only for me, and rather than apologize, she had sent a second email noting that transparency was, in her opinion, a professional virtue. She was not a person who said things she did not mean. She did not take it back. My name is Daniel Osei. I'm 34. I work in facilities logistics for a mid-sized property management company, which means I spend most of my days coordinating maintenance crews, chasing contractors, and ensuring that the gap between what a building needs and what actually happens to it is as small as humanly possible. It is not a glamorous job. It involves a lot of spreadsheets and a surprising number of conversations about pipe pressure. I am good at it, mostly because I have poor survival instincts and a high tolerance for problems that do not resolve cleanly. I live alone in a one-bedroom flat with a bookshelf I built myself and a dead plant I keep meaning to replace. I am not looking for anything. I am also not particularly not looking. I exist somewhere in the middle, which is, I think, where most honest people exist. Nadia Reyes joined our team 14 months ago. She was 31. She worked in project coordination, which meant her job was to make mine harder in structured and defensible ways. She had a red mechanical pencil that she kept tucked behind her left ear during meetings, never her right. And she wrote in margins with a precision that suggested she had, at some earlier point in her life, been very angry at someone who wrote in margins carelessly. She had a laugh that appeared rarely and without warning and sounded like she was annoyed at herself for finding something funny. We met at a fire safety briefing on her third day. She sat in the back row. I was presenting. Halfway through my slide on evacuation routes, she raised her hand and said with complete sincerity, "Is the assumption here that everyone can actually read this map? Or is that optimistic?" The map was, I had to admit, optimistic. I had made it myself. I told her so. She nodded and wrote something in the margin of her handout. I still do not know what she wrote. The existing dynamic, as two reasonable adults would have described it: colleagues with overlapping responsibilities, a functional professional relationship, and a mutual understanding that efficiency was more important than charm. That was the official version. The unofficial version was that she made everything harder than it needed to be. I made everything more complicated than it needed to be. And somewhere in the collision of those two tendencies, we had developed a working relationship that neither of us was willing to examine too closely. The thing I told myself, she was sharp and exacting, and I respected her professionally. That was the version I used. It was not technically a lie, it just wasn't the whole truth. The night it happened was a Wednesday in October. We had a building inspection scheduled for Friday morning, a significant one, the kind that required 3 departments to have submitted their compliance documentation by 9 a.m. Sharp. By 6:15 p.m., 2 of those departments had submitted. Ours had not, because the contractor report that should have landed in my inbox that morning had instead gone to a Daniel Osei at a completely different company, who had presumably been very confused by the arrival of 47 pages of HVAC documentation. I discovered this at 6:20. I stayed, Nadia stayed too, which I did not ask her to do and did not expect. She simply didn't leave. She appeared at my desk at around 6:45 with 2 coffees, one for her, one placed beside my keyboard without comment, and sat down at the workstation across from me. The office had emptied out by then. The overhead lights had switched to their after-hours mode, dimmer, cooler, the kind that make everything look slightly more serious than it is. Outside the window, the city was doing its usual thing. The coffee was from the machine on the second floor. It tasted like warm ambition and mild regret. I drank it anyway. "What do you need from me?" she asked. I told her. She nodded and got to work. We did not talk much for the first hour. That was the thing about working with Nadia. Silence with her was never uncomfortable, it was functional. She moved through tasks the way she moved through everything, deliberately, without wasted motion, occasionally making a small sound that meant she had found something wrong and was already fixing it. I found myself noticing at some point around 8 p.m. that the red pencil was tucked behind her ear again, even though there was nothing to mark. It was just where she put it when she was concentrating. I filed that observation under irrelevant and kept working. At 8:30, we broke to eat. She had crackers and a container of hummus that she produced from her bag with the calm efficiency of a person who plans for extended operations. I had a granola bar that I was mildly embarrassed by. We sat at the table by the window. The city lights were doing the thing they do in October, that particular quality of autumn dark that makes everything look like the last scene of something. This happens to you a lot, she said. Not a question. Wrong inbox problems? Staying late being the last one here. I considered that. It's quieter, I said. I think better when it's quiet. She looked at me for a moment. Just a moment. Then she looked back out at the window. Me too, she said. That was all. But something in the room had shifted, quietly, the way rooms do, and I noticed it the same way you notice a change in temperature before you understand what caused it. I picked up my granola bar. I told myself I was imagining things. I was, I decided, a man who had been staring at HVAC spreadsheets for 2 hours, and my judgment was not to be trusted. We went back to work. The problem resolved itself at around 10:15. The documentation was complete. The filing was done. I leaned back in my chair and experienced approximately 3 seconds of genuine relief before the adrenaline of the evening converted quietly into exhaustion. Nadia closed her laptop. She looked at the time. She said, "I'll walk out with you," which was a practical thing to say because the building locks after 10:30 and neither of us wanted to explain ourselves to security. We gathered our things. We walked toward the lift. The office at night is a different place entirely. The desks, emptied, look like they belong to people who no longer exist. The screens are dark. The hum of the building does something different to the air, lower, steadier, like the building is breathing slowly. We walked through it without hurrying, past the rows of workstations, past the meeting room with the glass wall, past the board with the project timelines that neither of us had updated in 3 days. The lift took longer than usual. We stood in front of it side by side, and I was aware, in the particular way you become aware of things in quiet places, of the exact distance between us. Aware of the red pencil still behind her ear. Aware that she was looking at the lift doors with an expression I could not parse. Not quite neutral, not quite something else. "Thank you," I said. "You didn't have to stay." "I know," she said. She said it in a way that was not casual, I noticed. I let it go. The lift arrived. The doors opened. We stepped in. The doors closed. The building's quiet wrapped around us, and the lift began to move. And I was standing there in my coat, thinking about HVAC reports and Friday's inspection, and the way she had said, "I know," when Nadia Reyes turned her head, looked at me directly, and said it. "I've been waiting to be alone with you," quietly, like she was putting something down. I went still. That is the only honest description of what happened to me. I simply stopped. The thought I had been halfway through abandoned itself. My chest did something I had no name for. I looked at her. She was still looking at me. She had not looked away, which was its own kind of answer to a question I hadn't asked yet. "Nadia," I said, which was not, I admit, my finest opening. "You can pretend I didn't say it," she said. Her voice was even. Her hands were not. Her left hand was holding the strap of her bag too tightly, the knuckles slightly pale. "I'm reasonably good at pretending things didn't happen. It's actually a professional skill." That sentence landed somewhere in the vicinity of my sternum and sat there. "I don't want to pretend it didn't happen," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Something moved across her face. Careful, controlled, and then very briefly not. "I've been watching you stay late," she said. "Not, I'm not surveilling you. I just always seem to be the last one leaving too, and you're always still here." And I started noticing things. She stopped, started again. The way you talk to the maintenance guys, you learn their names. You remember which one has the bad knee. You don't talk to them like they're a problem to be solved. She paused. That bothered me, actually. At first, it seemed like it was going to be difficult for me to dislike you properly. I realized I was smiling. I stopped on the grounds that this seemed inappropriate. Then I stopped stopping because she deserved honesty more than she deserved composure. You changed my name in your phone, I said. She went very still. 3 weeks ago, I said. You were showing me the contractor numbers. I saw the contact list. It said, Danny. Nobody calls me Danny. She said, and stopped. Like the name had been sitting there for a while. She looked down at her bag strap. Then she looked up. Her chin was up slightly, the way it always was when she was deciding to be brave about something. I changed it after the fire safety briefing, she said. That first week, you said you'd made the map yourself, and you were so. She stopped, started again. You were so unbothered about it being wrong. Like being wrong was just information, not a verdict. I'd never met anyone who treated being wrong that way. She looked at me steadily. I didn't change it back. The lift doors had opened, I realized. At some point during that conversation, the lift had arrived at the ground floor and the doors had opened onto the lobby, and neither of us had moved. You don't have to do anything with this, she said. I want to be very clear about that. This isn't a demand. I just stopped being able to justify not saying it. Her fingers tightened once around the bag strap. I thought about the 14 months, the fire safety briefing, the margins of every document she had ever handed me, covered in her precise handwriting, the coffee placed beside my keyboard without comment, the red pencil, the way she had said me too at the window, like she hadn't meant for it to carry as much as it did. Every time something went wrong with a job, I said you were the first person I wanted to tell, not because you'd fix it, because you'd tell me honestly what went wrong. And whenever something went right, I stopped. You were still the first person I wanted to tell. She looked at me. I kept deciding that was just how colleagues work, I said. I was very committed to that interpretation. Me too, she said. And this time the words did what they'd always been threatening to do. I reached out and took her hand, gently, carefully, giving her every opportunity to step back. She didn't. Her fingers closed around mine. She looked down at our hands with an expression that was not quite relief and not quite surprise, and was maybe something that had been waiting longer than either of us wanted to admit. Danny, she said quietly, not a question. Nobody calls me that, I said. I know, she said, and smiled. The real one, the one that came out small and slightly helpless, like she was annoyed at herself for being this happy about something. The security guard at the front desk cleared his throat. We had been standing in the open lift for what was objectively an unreasonable amount of time. He had the expression of a man who had seen many things in this lobby and was prepared to see several more. Sorry, I said. Take your time, he said, which was kind. We walked out into the October dark. The air smelled of cold pavement and something faintly like rain that hadn't arrived yet. She was still holding my hand, or I was still holding hers. The distinction had stopped mattering. We walked to the corner where our routes home diverged and stood there for a moment. Neither of us was in a rush to end. Friday, she said, after the inspection. Yes, I said. That's not a romantic proposition, she said. I genuinely want to know how the inspection goes. I know, I said. That's why I said yes. She laughed, the startled one, the one that came out like she'd been caught, and let go of my hand and walked away in the direction of her bus stop. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. I stood at that corner for an unreasonable amount of time. 3 months later, she started leaving her red pencil on my desk in the mornings. Not a note, not an explanation, just the pencil. I started making sure there was always a coffee waiting when she arrived. We did not discuss this arrangement. It required no discussion. The inspection, for what it's worth, went fine. 8 months after that, on a Saturday, I stood in the kitchen of my flat while Nadia sat on the counter reading something on her phone. And it occurred to me that the dead plant on my windowsill had been replaced at some point, replaced by a small succulent she had brought over in March, with the explanation that it was, in her professional assessment, harder to kill. I had not asked for it. I had not needed to. She had noticed the dead plant, and decided without comment that it should not stay dead. That was the moment I understood the shape of what we were to each other. Not new, not sudden, just honest, finally. Years later, when people asked how we got together, she would say it was because of a misfiled contractor report, which was accurate and said in her voice meant, I have no desire to make this romantic for you. I would say it was because she didn't take the exit I offered her, which was also accurate and which made her set her coffee down and look at me with an expression that meant she was deciding whether to argue with that. She didn't argue. She just reached over and put the red pencil back behind her ear. Nothing about us had changed, except everything had. What would you have done if a colleague said those words to you at the end of a long night? And have you ever held something back from someone? Not because you didn't feel it, but because you needed to be absolutely certain before you let it go. Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.